If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. We are Myth Vision. Your host, Derek Lambert. Today I have Dr. John Knight Lundwall. He is author of Mythos and Cosmos, Mind and Meaning in the Oral Age. Go in the description. You guys can check out the book. Also go to johnlundwall.com. That's johnlundwall.com down in the description. You guys can see what he's up to. He's a very good friend of mine. He's been on the show many times. If you are not familiar with him, you will be familiar with him. You're going to want to watch the rest of this show. He's going to take us into a PowerPoint presentation where you're going to be learning visuals like me. I'm more of a hands-on guy. I got to kind of see what I'm working with. And I want to go ahead and introduce him to the show. John, thank you for joining me, my brother.
Thanks for having me back, Derek. It's good to see you again.
Man. Yeah, it's always good to see you. You blow my mind every time with some new information I've never really thought about with mythology, history, the ancient cult that centers around the biblical narrative. And I can't wait to see what you have to bring to the table. Often you take us beyond the Bible. You show things that's like, no. Let's put the Bible on the shelf for a second. Let's check out what the ancient Indians were up to. I was like, ancient? What do you mean by ancient? Like, you're not talking like Christopher Columbus time. You're talking ancient. You're talking way back. And so I have no clue what you got presented today. You haven't even gave me a teaser. I thought we were getting into something different. But anyway, here we are.
Actually, I thought we would do something different tonight. The past several shows, it's been on biblical criticism, which I love. And I was just telling you, next year I'll be working on a project, Myth in the Bible, which, has been done. Mythology in the Bible has been done ad nauseum, but we've got a lot of brand new stuff that hasn't been touched. So we're quite excited about it. But look, your podcast is Myth Vision, right? And that covers a heck of a lot more than the Bible. That covers 99% of human history.
Right.
And so we're not even touching that. One of the things I do, Derek, is I'm the project leader of an archaeoastronomy team. The Cultural Astronomy Project of Utah, the official name right now is the Archaeoastronomy Project of Fremont Indians State Park. It's an actual location. And tonight I thought, you know what? Let's talk about that. This is ancient Native American, ancient being not thousands of years ago, 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. So they're prehistoric in the American sense. And so we will, I thought we would talk about that tonight. I run a team of researchers. We have gone out and have filmed, we're the first people to discover several of these petroglyphs have astronomical associations, alignments, sun shadow alignments, calendar alignments. And while people have been aware of that with rock art through different traditions, our team's the first to hit this specific culture group in these specific locations and to show some very interesting specific things. Some of the things we've discovered, we've discovered sun shrines using astronomy, right? So, we have a theory, the sun shrine should be over there because that's where the winter solstice sun sets from this viewing location. So if we go out there, there might be a shrine, and we go out there and what do we find? We find a shrine. So, so tonight I thought, hey, let me introduce your to one of my personal passions. We're not going to be talking about the Bible, astrotheology, all of which I love, and next time let's do that. But tonight I thought let's talk about one of the projects I've been working on for the past 3 years, and it's actually really cool stuff. So I'm excited.
Well, John, I'm definitely excited to do that. I love everything you present. It's never a dull moment when you start talking about this stuff. I want to open up with this, and I know you're going to get into the presentation. Are you going to explain, and maybe this needs to be explained right now, what's the importance of what you're doing right now, explaining sun shrines and the ancient worlds of understanding these things? Why does this matter to people? Is that something that you're not covering necessarily?
No. Well, for a lot of people, it might not matter.
Right.
This is uncovering layers of human history that that we're just so unfamiliar and ignorant with. I mean, look, even to this day, the mainstream archaeological academic point of view for the Americas is the earliest civilization, the earliest peoples inhabiting the Americas are the Clovis culture. And, they supposedly came over from the ice bridge, the Bering Strait during the last ice age and inhabited North and South America. This paradigm is falling apart all over the place. There are sites now where, the Clovis is dated to 12,000, 13,000 BCE. That's as early as anyone is supposed to have lived in North and South America. Well, there's actually mastodon bones that have been cut with tools. Only humans do that, right? Dating back past 100,000 years ago in North America.
Ooh.
So, but there are other sites that are 25, 35,000 years old with human-made tools. So this is all coming out in the past few decades. Well, it's actually, the information's been there for a long time, but you know how academia works. They have a theory, it becomes dogmatic. They don't want to go past that theory. Anyone who tries to challenge the theory at first gets destroyed.
Right.
And then slowly, as Thomas Kuhn says, slowly the people who uphold the current theory die off and the new theory takes hold. So what we're doing, the ancient inhabitants of Utah, I live in Utah, and the ancient inhabitants of Utah are called the Fremont Indians. That's not what they called themselves. And so I'm going to get into the Fremont culture tonight. And what we're doing is we're showing aspects of Fremont culture that no one knows. We didn't know. We started this project just trying to, we're going to go over a petroglyph panel tonight where I was running a star party for the park. And I just happened to walk up to this petroglyph during the day and saw this shadow move across it. And I realized within 5 minutes it was a calendar. And so, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about the Fremont. I was there running an astronomy star party. And so, I went home and I did some research. I went to the library for a day and said, has anyone written about this panel? Because I know people do work on rock art. I know there's archaeoastronomers. No one had written anything, not only on that panel, but there's so very little written about the Fremont. And so I called a friend of mine, John McHugh. He's a registered archaeologist with the state of Utah. He's been on numerous archaeological digs around the world. He actually runs an archaeological site here in Utah, overseeing the Fremont Petroglyph. So I called him, asked him if he wanted to start a study, because I couldn't find anyone. He was connected. He knows archaeologists. And so I needed the connections. And so I called him and said, John, do you want to do that? Well, John's brilliant. And, we don't always agree, but he is a very smart guy. Anyway, look, so what difference does this make? Well, we have made, the sunshrines are one thing. We've made some other discoveries that will change the history of Utah. And so we're working on those, and those are going to be written up in papers.
You can go ahead and say it, Father, I thank you that you've not revealed these things to babes.
Well, so in 2 weeks, so we've got some papers being written in academic journals. They're being published in academic journals. And look, 50 people will read those, right? So in 2 weeks, we've got an article being published in Ancient Origins, which is not academic, right? It's, aliens, and they have academic stuff, but they have everything on there.
Yeah.
But, look, 30,000 people is going to read that.
Yeah.
So we'll be tipping a little bit of our hand in that article when we show that there are Mayan connections with the Fremont in Utah. That Aztec Mayan influence made it all the way up into the heart of Western North America.
You said you weren't going to do it.
Yeah, well, there you have it. So, again, so this changes paradigms, and it changes the way people look at history, look at ourselves. Derek, as everyone assumes that all of our greatest discoveries are in the future, right? We're going to be discovering warp drives and space travel and interdimensional consciousness. None of that's going to happen, by the way. But that's what people think. I'm here to say that probably some of, if not the greatest discoveries we have yet to make as a species are in our past, not in our future. We know so little. And when we peel back the onion, we start seeing, my God, this goes back deeper and deeper. And it's far more complex than howling barbarians in the cave. And it's far more sophisticated and nuanced and tragic and violent. And, it's not all romantic. It's the human story. And it is filled with majesty and horror. And it goes back tens of thousands of years. And I think, to answer your original question, if we want to understand ourselves, relooking at the past, understanding the past is a very significant portion of that. And, just to tell you how we made the Mayan connection, part of these local, part of a tribe, a Fremont tribe in northeastern Utah, were headhunters. So this is coming straight up from Mexico, Central America. They're going around and ritually taking people's heads. And so this isn't, a romanticized shaman sit down and get more spiritual. This is, my God, this is pretty bloody stuff. But, what created that worldview? Well, it turns out to be all cosmology, the way they viewed the universe. It was necessary. And that's really interesting. We can call that primitive, but it's human. And in part, that always stays with us. How did the Holocaust happen? That's as primitive gets, and yet that's not even a century ago. So we peel back these layers and we find both miraculous things and also shockingly violent things. And we ask, how does it happen? And you start learning that human beings in every age, in every epoch, as far back as you go, are human beings. And what they did 10,000, 50,000 years ago is what we're capable of doing. And we think we'll never go back to headhunting. Well, is that true?
I doubt it.
Well, I doubt it too. So,
They say that the reason we have all these problems is that we haven't been drinking out of the skulls of our enemies. So I wouldn't be shocked. It's like, dude, you want to stop messing with me? I got your friend right here. Anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, it's all great stuff. I do this because it's passion. It's just,
I love your passion, John.
Passion for me. It's the Petroglyph panel I'm going to show you tonight. Since the state park was created in the 1980s, there's been over 2 million people to visit the park. It's kind of cool to be 1 out of 2 million to walk up and figure out what it is.
Wow.
And no one else has done that. It's kind of cool, right? You walk up and you realize that's a calendar. How does it work? Now, it took me 2 years to figure out how it works. There's a lot of work to figure out how it works. And but I figured it out, and it's amazing. It's quite sophisticated. So and yet simple and elegant. And so anyway,
Thank you.
it's a passion. So let's talk about that tonight. This is the Archaeoastronomy project, Fremont Indian State Park. I'm the project leader on the project. This boulder here is called Walking Man Rock. I'm going to get my laser pointer going here. This is the south side of the rock. It's covered in petroglyphs. They're very interesting petroglyphs. But what really interests me about this rock is it has petroglyphs on the north side of the rock. And it turns out there's over 3,600 petroglyphs in the canyon in this park, and there's only a couple dozen that face north. 3,580 are southward facing. So there's a methodology there. I'll explain it to you, but that makes north-facing petroglyphs really interesting. Why are they the exceptions? Well, this is one of the sites that we're studying. Also, it's a cool picture. It's got the Milky Way back there. I took that picture, Derek.
Wow,
it's kind of fun. I spent a lot of time out in the dark in the desert by myself. Sometimes I listen to classical music and taking these shots and being under the stars. All right, let's hop right into this. I'm going to try to do this in an hour, and we've already blown, I don't know, 20 minutes, maybe an hour and 20 minutes.
How many times have you promised that?
Yeah, right.
An hour is like 1,000 years. No,
I suck. It's true. So here's the culture we're dealing with. I've got this map over here, and the Fremont Indians is what they're called, Native Americans. They didn't call themselves the Fremont. One of the first excavations of this culture type was found by the Fremont River. So the culture then was named after the river. The river was named after a European explorer, John C. Fremont. So the Fremont Indians are named after a European explorer.
Oh my gosh.
So we have no idea what they called themselves. They inhabit the land territory of ancient Utah. And they're part of this cultural complex, the Puebloan cultural complex, the Southwest, the most famous of which is the Anasazi. You may have heard of the Anasazi. They're the cliff dweller builders of like Mesa Verde in Colorado, of Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. I don't know if you've been to Chaco Canyon, but it's the largest archaeological site in North America. And quite frankly, until the late 1800s, when Chicago started to build apartment buildings, Chaco Canyon had the largest building in North America. They have a pueblo there that has over 800 rooms, and so it's an amazing complex. And so they're well known. The Anasazi is well known. The Fremont are not well known, and so they inhabit this territory. We identify the Fremont based off 4 identifying markers. So again, they were oral. They had no writing. They left no writing. So here's what they left behind. They have gray ware pottery. So it's a plain gray ware pottery. This is an actual intact pot, which is very rare to find. Generally, you just find pieces. But, you know, these cultures down here painted and decorated their pots. The Fremont did that sometimes, but the majority of it is just plain gray ware pottery. They lived in pit houses, which were, you know, they'd dig down 3 feet in the ground, put up 4 posts, and then surround it with juniper beams and then cover it in adobe. And then they had a hole in the top, and they would crawl in and out of their pit house using a ladder. So that's where they lived. Most of these pit houses are pretty small, 10 feet in diameter, 12 feet in diameter, and that's where the family would, you know, sleep at night. But, you know, it's actually pretty cool during the summer, pretty warm during the winter. It's great insulation. So they lived in pit houses as opposed to pueblos. They wore moccasins. So this is found at an archaeological site. All these cultures over here wore sandals. The Fremont wore moccasins, probably because they're more northern climes, living all along the mountain range that runs north-south through Utah. You know, they're building their villages near creeks and rivers because you have to in order to survive. They're also agrarian. They're growing corn, beans, and squash, and you need a water source to irrigate your crops. So So they wear moccasins. And then the last thing is they left behind no writing, but thousands, tens of thousands of rock art images. The ones carved in the rock, like this one, is called a petroglyph. They're actually etched out of the rock. And sometimes they used, ochres and dyes to paint on the rock. Those are called pictographs. So petroglyphs carved, pictographs painted, and they left tens of thousands of images on the cliffs and bluffs and rock faces throughout this territory. In fact, about right here in Utah is a place called 9 Mile Canyon. And to be honest, I don't know how it got its name, because the canyon itself is about 43 miles long. And in any case, it has thousands and thousands of rock art. It's the world's largest art gallery. It has thousands of petroglyphs carved in that canyon. And so it's, but again, they lived all, the portions in Nevada and Colorado and all through ancient Utah is this culture group. We don't know. So there's different villages. We don't know if they spoke the same language. They probably spoke different, dialects, different languages. Their petroglyphs are unique in that they have trapezoidal bodies. Do you see that, Derek? If you see a trapezoidal body, you're looking at a Fremont piece of rock art. These guys have different styles. So this is consistent. Those trapezoidal bodies are throughout the entire Fremont landscape. And so they have these cultural identifiers, but, we don't know, different villages, different clans, different languages, maybe different religious ideas. I mean, certainly there are commonalities, but there's going to be large differences. Again, we know so very little. But here are the people. And so now they live in Utah, or ancient Utah, from about 300 to 1300 CE or AD. So they're about 1,000 years old. This early date is always getting pushed back. Now it's around 0 AD. But we don't know, so maybe 2,000 years old at the earliest, but their largest population growth, we know for certain, and that's between 9 and 1200 CE or AD. In those 3 centuries, all the villages grow tremendously. And there's a reason for that. There's a warming period that occurs in the American Southwest, and it's warmer and wetter. It rains more, so the growing season is extended. And by 1300, so one of the great mysteries of American Southwest archaeology is around 1300, all the villages of the Anasazi and the Fremont are vacated. They're abandoned. And no one knows exactly why. They get up and leave. And, so the majority theory is they migrate to the south and they become the Puebloan cultures, the Hopi, the Zuni. But surely they probably migrated in all different directions and got absorbed in different clans and tribes throughout North America and beyond. But the bottom line is there's this collapse that occurs around 1300, 1350 CE. And, that's a wide area that gets desolated. Well, part of that is climate change because the warming period ends and the winters get colder and longer. So it makes it harder to grow your crops. But that can't be the only reason. And so, so what else is contributing to that? And we don't know. All right. So here is the map of Utah. Here is Clear Creek Canyon. Here's a Google satellite image. It's this canyon right here, runs east-west. It's the Tushar Mountains are here. It was covered in sage and juniper and pinyon pine. There's all these creeks that run through it. 1,000 years ago when it was wetter, there would be ponds and lakes. Lots of elk and deer migrating through. It's not a Garden of Eden by any means. It would be very hard living, but you could sustain communities in this landscape. So it's south central Utah. It's in this canyon. And in the middle of this canyon is this hill. Here's another picture I took. I was just going to take a picture of the silhouette of the hill against the background of stars when a FedEx truck drove by the highway that's just right over here on to the right and lit up the hill. So I took my shot. So there you go. Thanks, FedEx. This hill is in the middle of that canyon. And in the 1980s, there was an archaeological excavation going on several miles away of a Fremont site. It was a couple small pit houses that archaeologists from Brigham Young University were excavating. And a local said, hey, you really need to go into Clear Creek Canyon because there's this large hill that is just covered in stuff. You really should check that out. So one of the archaeologists went in, he climbed to the top of this hill, and he wasn't there more than a few minutes before he realized this site is much bigger than the site we're working on. This hill is about a third of the size as it used to be. The original hill had 5 knobs on it, and so it was called Five Finger Ridge. Well, right now there's only 1 knob. The other 4 knobs are gone. Well, what happened to them? Well, in the 1980s, they were building Interstate 70 through the canyon, and the entire hill was contracted to be bulldozed out of existence. The dirt of the hill was going to be used as road base for Interstate 70 going through Utah. And so, of course, were this to happen today, Interstate 70 would have stopped. But in 1984, the rules weren't as tight. And so the archaeologists came, they got on the hill, they realized, my goodness, this site is big. Most of the Fremont villages that have been found are like a dozen buildings, right? There's 6, 8, 10 pit houses, a couple storage rooms, sort of ceremonial structure, and that's it, right? This hill had over 100 structures. It is the largest Fremont settlement ever discovered. And unfortunately, most of the hill is underneath Interstate 70. Every time I say this story, I burst out laughing. It's tragic, but it just shows. Look, Derek, this is one of the lessons that you learn. Almost all archaeology, it doesn't survive. The vast majority of it, 95% of it, does not survive. The Ohio Valley had a culture called the Mound Builders. And, in the early 1800s, there's a guy that went through and he recorded over 15,000 mounds. Well, today there's like 30.
Wow.
So what happened to them? Well, they got cleared out for, orchards and farms and crops and highways and roads and now Home Depots and Walmarts. It's gone. It's gone. And it's not just, that is worldwide. Worldwide, very little survives. And when you read the textbooks, it sounds like we've got it all figured out. It's all mapped out. We got these color graphics and these maps and these timelines and these PhDs, and they've all laid it out for us. And you just have to remember that what we're looking at with all that is 5% of history. We just have to remember we are just scratching the surface. Well, anyway, the majority of the hill is gone. They did. So what they did is they dug up as much as they could dig up. They found the foundations to 100 structures. They found several artifacts. They collected them, and basically they reburied them so that no one would touch them. And then the bulldozers took the majority of the hill away. So that's gone. But the other thing that we're finding is there's stuff in this canyon no one's looked at, no one's seen. There's still stuff to discover. And so and when I say that, everything's been picked over, right? So there's no, it's almost impossible to find a pot. All that's been taken, right? The early settlers, the pioneers, the Navajo and the Ute and the Paiute came in afterwards. So, there are sites that we go to and we can tell, hey, something was here, but there's nothing to find because it's been picked over. But we have discovered some things that are, as of yet, aren't on the map. And so there's still plenty of things to discover. So anyway, here's the deal. The hill got demolished. Interstate 70 got built, but it did cause a huge uproar. And so what ended up happening is the state of Utah made this canyon a heritage site and established Fremont Indian State Park, built a museum to house all the artifacts they found on the hill, and with a full-time staff since the 80s. And as it turns out, the silver lining is more has been preserved because they did that than would have been. So there's this massive loss at the hill. It's tragic, maybe even unforgivable, but at the same time, they've been able to preserve the artifacts, the rock art, and unless that's being watched over, it turns out that doesn't last long. So, so there is a silver lining to that story. Well, anyway, that's Five Finger Ridge. Here's a graphic of the canyon. The canyon runs east-west, so this is east over here, this is west down here, north over here, south over here. Here is Five Finger Ridge, that hill we just looked at. It is, so there's Interstate 70, where actually that's where Five Finger Ridge is at. It's underneath the road here. Right next to the interstate is Clear Creek. It's a creek. There's this dark line, I don't know if you can see it, the image is pretty low res, that runs next to the highway. The Fremont Indians then built their village south of the creek, and they basically used all this land as fields to plant their crops and irrigate from the creek. And so they were an agrarian society, and they also hunted, of course. And actually, we're not exactly sure the structure of how this Fremont village worked. It appears that at any one, so there's over 100 structures on that hill, but about any one time, only 15 were being lived in. And so, what does that mean? Did they build a house and it was only good for a certain period of time before they abandoned it and build a new one? Sometimes these cultures do that. Or were these people semi-nomadic? So there's only 15 full-time families living there, but did other people come in and out, annually or biannually as part of a nomadic tradition? Because people also do that in these cultures. So we're not sure, but the apex population was no more than 100 people. And so anyway, as far as full-time residences. So that is Five Finger Ridge. It's south of the river. Tonight we're going to be talking about this rock petroglyph here. It's called the Sunwell Panel. We've got these different marks. These are the different sites we're studying in the canyon. But I'm going to focus just on the Sunwell Panel tonight. There are a couple interesting places I wanted to mention, these little caves, because they give us a lot of good information. One thing before I move on, Derek, really interesting. So here's, it's hard to see, but all these are desert bluffs, rock faces, cliffs, and they're on both sides of the canyon. And when we first surveyed the canyon in 2017, we came across a startling discovery. Or, I don't know if we're the first to discover it, but we surveyed it and we realized that all the petroglyphs in the canyon were carved on this side. All these rock faces over here, none were carved. So they carve them on the north rock faces facing south. The petroglyphs are all facing south, or southeast, south, southwest. The vast majority of them. We found a few that face north, but there's 3,600 petroglyphs face north. The rest of them, about 90% face south, 10% face due east, due west, and less than 0.5% face north. So why did the Fremont carve all their petroglyphs on one side of the canyon? And it turns out this methodology is true for the entire, as far as I've been able to determine. Come on, it's not letting me go backwards. All right. And so, just a personal experience, a couple 100 miles away from this site, a completely different Fremont village, someone told me about a couple petroglyph panels that I was looking for. I was hiking up this wash in a canyon, and I couldn't find them. And this is early on in our study, when we just realized that in this canyon, they carved the vast majority of their petroglyphs facing south. And so I was walking up this wash in this canyon, couldn't find the petroglyphs. And I said, I wonder if this methodology holds out. So I myself, and then I looked at all the rock faces that face south that you could carve a petroglyph on. And those are the only rock faces I looked at. And it turns out by using that methodology, I found the petroglyphs I was looking for. I spent an hour, couldn't find them at all. And I pulled out my compass, oriented myself, and I found them all. And so at site after site, this methodology holds up over hundreds of square miles. So this is the methodology. So the rock art isn't just gibberish. It's not just scribblings. It's not Larry signing his name on the rock. They've got an actual methodology. What are they doing with that? Well, the bottom line is the vast majority of the petroglyphs face the sun. That's the southward orientation. It's a form of sun writing. The image itself is getting activated by the sun. That's the thinking. And so it becomes a living, breathing, cosmicized image when the sunlight touches it. Let me just tell you about these caves. The Sheep Shelter Cave, which is this one back here, far east of the canyon. This whole canyon is about 3 miles long is all. I wanted to bring this up because this is a really interesting, it gives us a lot of information. It's called Sheep Shelter Cave, but as you can see on this right image, it's not, it's a shelter. It's a rock shelter, not really a cave. It's about 26, 28 feet wide, about 5 feet deep and 6 feet tall. Now, 1,000 years ago, the floor would have been at least another 6 feet lower. It's been filled in with debris and erosion and dust and dirt. So, the Fremont were about 5 feet tall. They're short people. So the original cave floor would have been 12 feet down as opposed to 6 feet down. But look what they did. They carved petroglyphs around the cave ceiling. They've got this line going all the way around the perimeter of the cave ceiling. Do you see that? There's these half circles on top of the line. There's 7 of them around it. There's a couple double circles there. There's these gorgeous petroglyphs in the front of the cave. Those actually are facing northward. You got a scorpion, 3 sheep, an anthropomorph. What's interesting about this cave is it gives us a date range. When archaeologists first excavated the canyon, they came in, they dug several feet down in this cave, and they found stone tools, bone, a variety of things. But the most important thing they found was several layers of hearth ash, of campfire ash. And so the earliest layer of ash dated to 3500 BCE. Okay, so people have been migrating through this canyon for 5,500 years, minimum, right? So probably much longer than that. So the earliest layer so that's not Fremont. We don't know who those people are. That's 3,500 is, so that, that's not Clovis at 13,000, but it's, it's pre-Fremont, pre-Southwestern complexes. So, but the interesting thing is the latest layer of campfire ash was 500 AD, 500 CE. And that's about the time the Fremont inhabit the canyon, which tells us that before that, the people coming through the canyon used this cave shelter as a shelter. They walked in there, they built a campfire, they camped for the night or for the week, and then they moved on, right? The Fremont come in, they make it a permanent habitation, and they don't build any fires in the cave. Instead, they carve petroglyphs. So they're using it for a different purpose, not as a cave shelter. Well, what is the purpose they're using it for? Well, the archaeologists call it sheep shelter cave because there's all these sheep petroglyphs in the cave shelter, so they call it the sheep shelter. It turns out it's a sun shrine. This cave faces south, and for 2 weeks of the year, you can see the sunrise at winter solstice. And for only those weeks of the year, 2 weeks of the year, does sunlight penetrate the cave. That's what this picture is. So the sun priest would sit in there and determine the day of winter solstice in this cave. But there's all kinds of religious associations with this that these petroglyphs are probably related to. The winter solstice is associated with death and rebirth. And so there's cosmological and religious functions to the cave. In any case, there you have it. I wouldn't call it a sheep shelter cave. I'd call it the sheep observatory cave. It's a winter solstice sun shrine. I have some great pictures because this is sunrise on winter solstice, where the sunlight fills the cave. And then as the sun moves up in the sky, the sunlight slowly recedes until there's just this band of light on the back cave wall, and it looks exactly like an arm with a hand. It's like the finger of God. And it's awesome. And, so I think that was significant. In any case, there's bars across it. Why do you think there's bars across it? Because people go in there. No. So there's vandalism everywhere. And let me just pause and say to all your viewers, please never etch, write, deface, touch any rock face with rock art on it. This isn't gibberish. It isn't these ancient Native Americans signing their name. This is sacred sun writing. A lot of it has deep astronomical and cosmological connections. I've spent several nights sleeping in this cave shelter, and I've discovered if you sit in this cave and you look at the southern, as you look out, there's a bluff across the canyon, and above the bluff, you got a 20-degree wedge of sky that you can see from within the cave. That 20-degree wedge of sky that runs along the cave ceiling is the ecliptic, which means that is where all the planets move across the sky. As a sun priest, you sit in this cave and you watch all the planets move across the cave ceiling through the year, right? So this is an observatory site. So that's just a freak of coincidence of nature. And I tried taking pictures of all of this, but I have these iron bars to deal with. I can't, I'm sitting in there and I have to take pictures in the cave and move my camera outside of the bars. And they do this because everything gets vandalized. There's so much vandalism at some of these sites that they're irrecoverable. I've been to a couple sites. I am following key motifs over hundreds of miles, tracking them at different Fremont sites. One site in particular is a key. It is so important to my work, and the top half of it has been chiseled out. Someone just chiseled out the petroglyphs and took them with them. And so that prevents me, so I'm screwed. That prevents me from doing my work. And so again, not only is it a felony, it makes me sick. It's gross. Don't do it. This is that other cave of 100 hands. And by the way, this cave wall is covered in graffiti. I have photoshopped it out. So I am trying to give you a look of what the Fremont did with it. This is a night shot. It's a bigger cave shelter than the sheep shelter one. And it's on the south side of the creek, but it has no petroglyphs. It's only pictographs of hands. And that's their actual handprints. They're pretty small. And so the whole back wall is covered in handprints that probably some sort of cultural initiation going on in this cave. I took this picture at night, lit it up with lights. It was pouring rain, and it's completely dry in there. I'm at the cave entrance, getting totally soaked with my camera, but So anyway, let's go to this petroglyph. So here we are at the west end of the canyon. Here is what a very common rock bluff looks like in this canyon, and surrounded by sage. You got juniper up at the top of the bluff. And it turns out that rock face there is covered with hundreds of rock art images. And what's interesting about these, you can't date rock art images because you can't date rock. So the way we date them is basically the more eroded, the harder to see, generally the older they are, right? These rock images are almost gone. They are so faded that actually you can't see a lot of them during the day because the sunlight blanches them out. And so the best time to view them is in the morning or the evening when there is a different angle of the sun on the horizon and you can actually see the petroglyphs better. This is one of the things you learn when you look at rock art is I've been in this alcove to the left here for 3 years, and just last summer I discovered more rock art images I had no idea were there just because they popped out at the right time of day, right? And so in any case, these are old petroglyphs. You know, the majority of these petroglyphs are probably carved between 9 and 1200 CE or AD. When the population boom happened, I would say these are much older than that. And so they're probably at the early end of the Fremont occupation, 500 or so. There is rock art here that's actually newer, so that these might be 9 to 1200 CE. But the creme de la creme, one of the most impressive petroglyph panels we have yet discovered, is on this rock face here. And it turns out it has layers of petroglyphs on it. So there's an old layer and then a newer layer carved on that and a newer layer carved on that. So this rock face, the Fremont reused over centuries. And so they do that. It's fairly rare, which means the rock face itself is important to them. Okay, so that gets us to pay attention. Well, here is the petroglyph. So it's about 5 feet wide, 3 feet tall, and most of the petroglyphs, Derek, are anthropomorph, so they're humanoid figures or figures of deities. They got those trapezoidal bodies. They have, you know, headdresses on. There's a lot of animals, tons of sheep, some deer, you know, very few elk, but sometimes they show up. There's plant imagery. So again, 2017, I'm running a star party in May, and at night is when I do all my work for the park. During the day, I'm just hiking the trails, looking at the rock art, and I'm seeing hundreds of images of deities and animals. And I walk up to this one, and it's completely different because it's this big. It's big. It's 5 by 3 feet. It's geometric, has all these motifs. So it's something different. And it just so happens, do you see this triangle of shadow right here? I walked up to it when that triangle of shadow was moving across the rock face. That happens an hour a day during the summer months. So had I walked up to it an hour earlier, an hour later, I wouldn't have seen anything. An hour earlier, the entire rock face is in shadow. An hour later, the entire rock face is in light. So there's only, it's about an hour time frame where a light shadow display happens on this rock face. Okay. Well, so I walk up and I see that. And the other thing I see is this wheel that has 12 wedges in it. And so I count the wedges, 12. Again, I don't know anything about the Fremont. I don't know anything about the rock art. There's these cupules or holes that have been carved into the rock. These ones have been pecked into the rock. This one here is very faint. These are deep and easy to see. This hole up here, when I first saw it, I thought it was just a natural hole in the rock. But then after a while, I realized, no, they drilled that hole. These holes have been pecked. this hole has been drilled. They took a bone or a stick and they drilled a rock. It had striations in the hole. So they drilled into the rock. So there's these carvings in it. But what really piqued my interest, first time seeing this, were these lines carved into 3 of the 12 wedges of the wheel. This wedge here has 11 lines, and then that has one line, a total of 13 lines. Well, look, I board member of the Utah Valley Astronomy Club. We partner with state national parks to help run their astronomy and science programs. That's why I'm down there. So, I'm just a backyard astronomer, and I just so happen to know that these, I also have a PhD in comparative myth and religion. So I know that these ancient cultures, their primary calendar is a lunar one. I know that. And it turns out there's 12.37 lunar months in a year. I know that. So what that means is there's 12 lunar months, but then there's a partial lunar month in a solar year extra, which means there are 13 lunar phases. If you're tracking a specific lunar phase, if you're going from new moon to new moon, very often there's going to be a 13th phase in any given year, right? So, 12.37 lunar months in a year, but technically 13 lunar phases of a specific phase. The difference between a lunar year of 12 months and a solar year of 365 days is 11 days. So I walked up and I counted 11 lines. I counted the 13 total, which is a lunar number, the 12 wedges. And, within 5 minutes, I was like, you know what? They're reconciling a lunar and solar count. They've got their solar year being divided up into 12 lunar months plus 11 days. And they've carved all this on the rock. How they're doing that, I don't know. But I think that's what they're doing. And then, of course, I saw the shadow phenomenon, and I said, oh, wait a second. Something else is going on here. They're using the shadow. I was completely wrong, by the way. They're using, been looking at, was this one here. Do you see this triangle of light? This is what they're using. Well, they're also using this, but this is their primary instrument. A couple years to figure out how they're using it, and I'm going to show you. We're the first people since the ancient Fremont to figure this out. Okay? So you get it straight from the horse's mouth. Just a few other motifs. There's 7 wavy lines here. We think that represents the 7 lunar months of the agricultural year, from equinox to equinox. Spring equinox, March. Early March is when you germinate your seeds. September is the last of your harvest. So the 7 lunar months is your entire agricultural year. And we think that's what that represents. We have a good reason to think why that represents that. There's a quadrated field here. Look, there's a lot of older stuff. Do you see all these little marks underneath? Yeah. So that's the older layer, and there's a couple layers underneath. So this quadrated field is actually that's a previous older layer, but they've carved right next to that quadrated field this upside down corn tassel. It's a corn tassel, the top of the corn cob, right? And there is, it's hard to see in this image, but there's one, see, there's a cupule there where they've pecked in the rock. There's one right here at the bottom of the corn tassel. Turns out that's very important. So what's really interesting is there's these 37 dots carved in the rock. They're counting dots. They're counting off 37 dots. And then there's these 2 guys with huge erect phalluses walking across the dots. And then, once you see that, then you realize, oh my God, there's, testicles and a penis, and it's ejaculating onto the guys. And oh my God, the entire thing is a phallus. Do you see that? So this is, we called it the Sunwell Petroglyph, but you could call it the penis petroglyph because,
wow.
Because the entire thing is a phallus. Well, one, this makes this very difficult because I give presentations to
I can't imagine.
yeah. So there's families coming with little kids, and so I have to kind of be very articulate about how I express this. But immediately, what's this tell us? It tells us this is a fertility glyph, and ultimately they are cosmicizing the fields through what is happening on this glyph. They're analogically capturing the sunlight on this glyph, and through ritual, they're transferring that onto the crops in the field. Again, we don't think that way. That's part of what they're doing. There's, I'm sure, religious significance to this. But
I was going to say like a fertility type cultic aspect.
Oh yeah, no,
nature, as well as their own tribes and
absolutely.
Wow.
So part of their whatever their fertility ritual is, it includes 37 days, and so we don't, specifically, we're still trying to figure out why 37, why the number 37, and we have some ideas on it, but let me show you what they're doing with the petroglyph. To explain it, I just want to tell your audience how the sun works, okay? If I am standing, I'm taking this picture, it's a panoramic picture. I'm standing on top of that hill, Five Finger Ridge, where the village was, and I'm looking east. If you look on the horizon, the sun doesn't rise in the same spot every day. You know this, right, Derek? The sun moves north and south through the year. So at winter solstice, standing on Five Finger Ridge, it stays there for a couple of days, then it slowly starts moving north every day, rising slowly north, until, this is December 21st on February 5th, which is halfway between winter solstice and spring equinox. That's your cross-quarter day, your halfway mark. And that's where the sun, it's actually, this is an old graphic, it's actually a little bit to the left of that. I got to fix it. But you'll notice that while that's halfway between equinox and solstice, it's not halfway distance-wise, and that's because the sun moves quicker during the middle of the year than on the outside of the year, right? It slows down towards the solstices, stops, stays there, slowly returns, starts moving quicker and quicker. There's the equinox position, quicker, hits the cross-quarter day at May 5th, and then June 21st, summer solstice, stops, starts going back. August 5th, hits the cross-quarter day, comes back here. September 21st, fall equinox, comes back, right? So that is your pendulum of your solar cycle, back and forth. Make sense? Give the thumbs up before I move on.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Spot on the horizon through the year on each day, but also the declination of the sun changes. In winter, the sun is lower in the sky. In summer, the sun is high up in the sky. So it shifts high to low in winter, back to high as it's moving across the horizon. Well, what does this do? What this does is it changes the way the sunlight shadow lines work on the rock face. There's a certain sun shadow line occurring at winter, but by summer solstice, it's different because the angle of the sun is different. Does that make sense? Position of the sun is different. The height of the sun is different. So all this changes the sun shadow lines on the rock face. Well, this is important to know. So here we're going to start at spring equinox, March 21st. This is when you start germinating your seeds. I'm going to just display this using graphics, and then I'm going to exit out of my PowerPoint and show you a little time-lapse video so you can see what I'm explaining graphically, okay? On the day of...
I'm muted, by the way, just so you know, like, I don't want to interrupt this.
Okay. On the days of equinox, so this is both spring equinox in March, but then the sun comes up here and it comes back, fall equinox in September. On the days of equinox, a triangle of light appears on the rock face and touches the cupule or hole pecked into the rock right here. It then moves along the bottom of the upside down corn tassel and ends at this hole up here. So this is what it does. It's moving along. It touches this cupule. It moves along the bottom of the corn tassel, and then it touches this hole up here. That's what it does on the days of equinox. But as the sun moves north on the horizon, it also moves higher in the sky, and what that does is it shifts this sun dagger over to the right for the 1 hour of the day that it does this. And so by your cross quarter day, halfway between equinox and summer solstice, the tip of the sun dagger comes up from the bottom of the rock. And it hits this left cupule. Do you see that cupule of that cupule? It hits this left cupule first. Then it hits the center cupule. Then it ends with the top hole. That's at the cross quarter day. Then at summer solstice, the light arrow has shifted further to the right, and the tip of it first hits the right cupule, then the center hole, then the hole up at the top.
And you found this out
over 2 years.
Holy crap!
Over
That's
2 years.
Brilliant, John.
It took me to figure it out. So you know what? Let's.
Like you just explained, 2 years of headaches. So simple.
I did, actually. Here it is, summer solstice. Here's a time lapse. The sunlight, do you see that? Moving in from the left. And then right down here, keeps moving. We are going, here it is, right there. Do you see this? Hits that cupule right there.
Yep.
And then it climbs up the wedge with 11 lines. See that triangle of light?
Mm-hmm.
Coming up, hits the center cupule right there. Boom. And then it keeps coming up until it
see it's right there now, yeah.
finishes off on that hole. See that?
Yeah.
Now guess what? Something else is happening here. Oh, I'm replaying it. So here's that triangle of light. Now, what's really cool, Derek, is that this rock face is covered in shadow, and when this triangle of light comes up, it's coming up from the ground. Literally, it's like a stalk of corn growing up from the ground on the rock face, and it's sunlight. And they've carved these cupules. So they've carved these cupules across the rock face to capture the tip of that sun dagger as it moves across the rock face, because each cupule is being fertilized by the power of the sun.
Mm.
So what else is going on here? I'm going to... Okay, here we go. Now, let me show you what else is going on. We are going to... Do you see the two guys with erect phalluses?
Yep.
While the sun dagger comes up through the center of the wheel, this is going on with these two guys with the phalluses. The sunlight touches the left phallus until the phallus is completely covered in light, but the body remains in shadow. And then the sunlight moves around and covers the right phallus in sunlight. The body remains in shadow.
Whoa, okay.
Do you see that?
Yeah, that's weird.
And so both those phalluses get revealed in the light when the sun dagger finishes up at the top hole here. So look, what the Fremont did is they watched this sun shadow phenomenon over who knows how many days and years, and they carved every motif on this petroglyph according to the sun shadow phenomenon. The template is the sunlight. Okay, nothing is happenstance. They carved these two guys with erect phalluses right here on this rock specifically to catch this sun shadow phenomenon for the 1 hour of the day. This only happens during the month of solstice. The other phenomenons, this is a summer solstice phenomenon. So when the two phalluses are illuminated in sunlight, that tells the sun priest, I'm at the season of summer solstice, which is the fertilizing month of the year, which is where the phalluses get lit up, right? And so these guys are carved to have their phalluses lit up in the sunlight while the sun dagger moves through the through the sun wheel. And I'll just go through here.
Wow.
Let's see. Okay, here is the cross quarter day time lapse. This is August cross quarter day, and you'll see the sun dagger. It's starting right there.
Yep.
And it's coming right up and hits the left cupule. Summer solstice is here, and then here it goes. It goes up, fills the left wedge with the one line, hits the center hole, and finishes up at the top.
Let me ask you something real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
Is there a certain symbolism you think between why the body gets shadowed in the phallic situation in the summer solstice versus what we just saw in the quarterly? Because it didn't look like their bodies were shadowed on the quarterly.
No, they're not. So that only happens during the summer solstice. So that is basically sympathetic. You could call it sympathetic magic, but they're analogically bringing fertility into the motif at the summer solstice by illuminating the phalluses. They carve those there, so only the phalluses get illuminated at the summer solstice, and that empowers the panel with its full fecundity. Okay? And so that is what they're doing. Yeah, at cross quarter day, this does not happen up here. It doesn't happen any other part of the year except at summer solstice.
Wow.
Okay? So that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
that they watch you. That. Yeah. No, so they're being very conscientious as to how they're creating their petroglyph, capturing the sunlight in the way that they do that. So there's cross quarter day, and then we're going to move to the equinox time lapse. And this is really grainy, but there is, boom, you can see how it works. It touches this cupule here and skims along the bottom of the corn tassel. Let's see it again. Right.
Boom.
Oh, there it is.
Yep,
yeah, right
that cuts right there. Yep.
Yeah. And so there it is. Yeah, so I mark it. And boom.
Wow.
So basically, the corn tassel then gets hit on March 21st spring equinox and September 21st fall equinox with that sun dagger. And that just so happens, so in March, it's when you're germinating your seeds. Your crops haven't yet been activated to emerge into the world. So the sunlight hits an upside down corn tassel. The corn tassel hasn't grown yet, right? And then in fall, it happens again when you've picked everything. The corn tassel is re-emerging back into the winter underworld. So that is, we think, the meaning of that upside down corn tassel. They carved it there to catch the sun dagger as it moves across it. They got that cupule right there, and that activates the motif. And that tells them when the sun dagger touches this, that's when I germinate, and that's the last day of my harvest, right? From equinox to equinox, right? When the sun dagger touches the left cupule, in May, that's when I plant. In August, that's when I harvest. So when the sun dagger touches that is your planting and harvest days. And then this one is your summer solstice. That's all these Puebloan cultures had special summer solstice rituals, which gave power to the tribe, to the people, to the fields through the year.
That's fascinating, John. This ties in a lot of ancient culture and their fertility connections to agricultural stuff as well.
Yeah.
Which is hint, in my opinion, I think you'd agree, why the phallus is erected or fully erected here during summer solstice. It's in between the fall and the rise. It's at its peak. It's like, now's the time, baby. You know what I'm saying?
Correct.
Wow.
That is correct. All right. One more. How are we doing on time?
You got, if you're trying to stick to your hour, you got like 15 minutes.
I'm screwed. All right. But hey, I got to get back to my PowerPoint. All right. So here I'm just showing you. Let me get my laser pointer back. This cupule, when the sun dagger hits it, it's summer solstice. That's the cross quarter day. May cross quarter day is planting. August cross quarter day is harvest. This one here is the equinoxes. March equinox is germinating. Fall equinox is the last of the harvest. And then these, that hole there is basically just, that's the center of the entire cosmos that's happening. And so as the sun dagger climbs up, it always hits that hole and terminates at the top hole that's drilled in the rock. So again, this is just showing you that as you know, at the spring equinox, you're getting one phenomenon. You move to the cross quarter day, the summer solstice, and then the same thing happens on the rock face as the sun moves back. It's just a different part of the year. And so, so there you go. All right. One last thing I want to share about this petroglyph. So that took me a couple years to figure out how they were using that, using the sunlight. The whole drama up here with the two phallic men only occurring at that occurs a couple weeks of the year. That just totally blew me away. They literally carved those figures to catch that effect of the sunlight so that the phalluses would be illuminated during the summer solstice.
And maybe to attract the women, women come by and they're like, hey, I think I'm going to hang around for, I'm just kidding.
The women probably just walked by this petroglyph and rolled their eyes.
Right?
You guys. So,
exactly.
No, this is a major panel. I've seen thousands of petroglyphs, and there are other calendar petroglyphs that use the sunlight like this, but I haven't found one that is using the sunlight for 7 months of the year. And actually, we think it's using it year round. We're still working on that. And when we figure that part of it, that's probably another 2 years of work. I'll give you another presentation. I'll say, this is what we think they're doing. I don't want to tip the hat, but we actually think it's a year-round calendar. But let me show you something else. Outside of the main phallic motif, we got this really interesting petroglyph image here. Let me just pull that up. It's a horizontal line with a square here, a square at the top, square bisected at the left, a faint one underneath, and out of this central square is this curved line. Okay, so that's what it is. Now, look, Derek, I'm not huge into petroglyph interpretation. It's just that you look at this stuff after a while, and you have to, with no writing, it's guesswork, right? And my thing is, what can I prove as far as the sun shadow lines? I mean, look, I've got time-lapse photography that proves what they're doing. So I am 100% confident with my findings, because I can say, and I don't have to interpret the petroglyphs to say this is how they're using the sunlight shadow on the rock face. Okay, having said all that, I spent 2 years looking at this panel during the daylight, but I also spent a lot of time at night, and it really quick something stuck right out at me. With this rock face. So here is the panel right over here. I've lit it up using LED lights. This is a night shot of the whole bluff with the stars coming out. Kind of cool shot. Here is the bluff. So there is the panel right there. You see it? And I don't know. This is covering part of the image I want to show you. This right here is the Big Dipper. Oh gosh, every time I put my cursor up there, do you see the Big Dipper, Derek? This is covering part of it. The Big Dipper is that bowl. There's 4 stars and the tail. Okay? And the Big Dipper sits vertically over this rock bluff 1 hour after sunset on spring equinox. So I'm standing here in front of this panel, March 21st, the evening of, taking a picture of the Big Dipper, and it literally stands vertically. So I'm back about 50 yards from the petroglyph, getting a shot of the whole bluff, maybe even back a little bit farther than 50 yards, maybe 80 yards. But here I am. I've got my camera as close to the rock face as I can. It's about 3 inches off the ground, and I'm shooting up because I'm trying to capture. Do you see that star and this star?
Mm-hmm.
That white dot and that white dot. Do you see them?
Yeah.
Those 2 stars are the 2 stars of the bowl of the Big Dipper. So the other 2 stars sit up here. The bowl sits right on top of the bluff. Okay, so the tail is behind the bluff, but those 4 stars sit right on top of this rock. If you're standing right in front of the petroglyph from that point of view on the evening of spring equinox. Okay, well, I realized something quickly. If you look at the Big Dipper at the same time every night through the year, the Big Dipper can be used as a calendar. So this is the Big Dipper. Do you see the Big Dipper right here?
Yes.
At summer solstice. It's high up in the sky. Okay? At spring equinox, it was right on top of the rock bluff right here. At summer solstice, it's high up in the sky. At fall equinox, here it is over here. And I'm actually to the left of the panel now. But from in front of the panel, you lose half of the bowl. It's behind this rock bluff. So all you see is kind of the tail coming down and these 2 top stars. Okay? And then at winter solstice, you don't see it at all. It's behind the rock bluff. Okay? So at spring equinox, it sits on top. Summer solstice, high in the sky. Fall equinox, it's on the western bluff, half submerged. Winter solstice, it's entirely behind the bluff. Well, as I explained this to my archaeologist friend John McHugh, that how you could use the Big Dipper as a calendar through the year, I was explaining this the first time we looked at the Big Dipper on spring equinox in 2018, because I was so impressed as to how the 4 stars sat right on top of the bluff. And I said, John, all you have to do is look at those 4 stars, and you can tell within a few days when your summer solstice is, when your equinox is, depending on the position of those stars in the sky. And as I was explaining it to him, I looked down and I saw this petroglyph, which is exactly, it's got the 4 boxes and the curved tail of, which is this. So this is immediately, I said, that's got to be the Big Dipper through the year. Here is your spring equinox position, your summer solstice position, your fall equinox position, and this invisible one is your winter solstice position. There it is through the year. Now, again, here's the North Star. It's in a saddle of rock that, 1,000 years ago, the celestial north would have been a few degrees off, but all you had to do is step back 5 feet to get the North Star back into the saddle of rock. But the bottom line is, while this is a little bit subjective, we are really confident that they're analogizing the stars into this petroglyph as well. They've got the sunlight through the year from equinox to equinox analogized into the petroglyph, and now they're embedding the Big Dipper into the petroglyph. So they're cosmicizing the entire celestial skyscape into the rock art image. All right. So, hey, you know what? I'm finishing my PowerPoint. So I want to, I have, your viewers can go to my YouTube channel. Just look up John Lundwall on YouTube. And I have there a series of videos that go over this. The video entitled The Sunwell Petroglyph shows all the time-lapse photography, explains how it works, shows the night shots, shows how the Big Dipper works. It's 19 minutes long, which is a lot shorter than this hour-long a podcast. But they can go and they can look at it. Here is a different, that's a 12-minute video that shows a very similar feature. It's a completely different petroglyph. It's a pictograph. It's a painting. It's not like this calendar. This calendar is very sophisticated. The pictograph uses the sunlight only at summer solstice, and it is fascinating. But here's the thing, that pictograph is a headhunter pictograph. And so this starts getting us into Mexico and Central America as we do our research. So you can watch that video and you can see, the Fremont all across their landscape are using the sun shadow lines as part of their rock art, right? They're incorporating it into their rock art, and these two videos show exactly how they do that. I've got another video up to show just how sophisticated the Fremont actually get, because there's a artifact that was discovered in Five Finger Ridge that has all the, it has 2 crescent moons on it, and it has all the numbers carved on it to track the 19-year cycle of the moon. It's called the Metonic Cycle. That is very sophisticated. This, so here we think they're just living in pit houses and mud holes, and they're crawling out of the cave, and, they're going around and oomba goomba, right? But they are very sophisticated. They're sophisticated lunar watchers, solar watchers, stellar watchers. And this is because, Derek, in my own field of research, oral people are cosmological thinkers. Literate people are not. We've lost that sensibility. But oral people use the sky as their printing press. Right? This is the point I made in our last podcast. They map their memories to the sky. When a certain star rises on the horizon, that tells them when to perform a ritual, when to tell a myth, when to perform a cultural function. When a certain star sets on the horizon, same thing. So the stars and constellations become memory maps that regulate the culture through the year. So they are constantly looking at the sky. And so, yes, they can figure out how the sun works. We say they can't do that. Oh my God, they figured that out thousands of years ago. And that's the way oral peoples have worked it for tens of thousands of years, probably. So they figured out how the sun works. They figured out how the moon works. We have lost that knowledge because we developed cell phones, right? So when you develop a new technology, the old technology disappears. And the old technology was observational astronomy. They got very sophisticated with it. And it's we who say, oh, no, they couldn't have figured that out. They're a bunch of primitives. They figured it out, right? And they were very smart with it. And so I have a video there that shows the lunar cycle, the 19-year lunar cycle, and how the pendant found in that canyon tracks it. And it turns out, as far as we know, the only other location in North America where that 19-year lunar cycle was being tracked was with the Anasazi in Chaco Canyon. Okay, so the Anasazi had figured out the 19-year lunar cycle. Now we're the first to show, hey, the Fremont did it too.
Wow.
Right? So we're the first to show this. We're the first to show the Sunwell Petroglyph. So you watch these 3 videos, it's all new stuff. And so it's kind of exciting to do this work. Fills me with giggles, and I enjoy it a ton. All right, I'm done. Any questions, Derek?
I just can't wait to hear about the head hunting stuff. I'm just kidding.
Dude, it's awesome.
That was awesome. I hope everybody is still awake, because this is stuff that's extremely important. I say that because, this stuff can go over people's heads, or they may say, what's the importance? And personally, I just want to make a comment. I don't really have a question, John, because we've got more coming from you. That I'm excited about so much. You have so many topics that when I've asked you, hey, you have any ideas what you'd like to do? And you give me this like Bible-sized list of things we could do shows on. And I'm like, So what are you in the mood for? Because you can cover anything there is pretty much. My comment is that I can see in this ancient hieroglyphic art, astrology, if you will, science for the ancient Indians here from Fremont and on, I can see how that can find its way as writing comes on the scene into stories and into images in these stories that kind of find their way hints in there, like the biblical narrative, so to speak. If they're doing it here in America, and we know they did it over in Egypt, it wouldn't blow my mind. I mean, obviously it would and it wouldn't. I say that meaning I would expect it to be something to find over there, that they have similar stuff like this that evolved into the narratives that we're reading about today, where they historicized myth, if you will, and from stone into paper or papyri or whatever. So,
Right. Well, no. So look, this is a totally oral culture, no writing whatsoever.
Right.
Probably no concept of writing. And so what we get then is this rock art. One, there's a methodology behind it. 90% of it is facing the sun, southwards. So it's sun writing. Two, every image you're seeing has a myth associated with it. We just don't know what they are. But that whole Petroglyph panel, the Sunwell panel, had probably a whole mythological drama associated with it that they would tell and perform every year. So they're performing rituals, they're telling a story. We're looking at the heart of their mythology, and yet we don't know what it is because we don't have the oral tradition, we don't have the written tradition. All we have is this piece of rock art, right? So all the rock art has mythologies and rituals. Not all of them, but I bet the vast majority of them have mythologies and rituals associated with them. And what's cool then is three, they've aligned the sunlight. They're petroglyph to the sunlight. They're watching how the sunlight moves across the rock face through the year, and then they slowly chalk in how they're going to carve their motif, because they want the motif to capture the sunlight at the right time. That's their temple, right? So, these are more primitive. They're not building temples like you find in Egypt.
Right.
They're not building Stonehenges like you find in Britain. But they are using sophisticated observational astronomy. They are mapping the sunlight and their petroglyphs together, and therefore they're mapping their myths and rituals with that as well. And so the whole thing is regulated by the cosmos, by the seasons, and all we get then is just we don't even get the cliff notes. We don't get the footnotes. We're just getting crumbs, right?
Wow.
We're just getting the rock art. It's very hard to interpret, but on these panels that, the panel I just showed you, we can at least interpret that they're using it as a fertility drama through the year, apexing at the summer solstice when those two phallic men get their phalluses get illuminated. And this is literally bringing cosmic powers down from the sun and the sky into the fields, into the tribes. We know they're doing that. We just don't know what else is associated with
it.
Look, those same sun shadow lines are cast by a full moon. So they're not sun shadow lines, they're moon shadow lines. So did they line up some of their petroglyphs to the light of the full moon? I bet they did. I wouldn't know how to find that because I'd have to live in the canyon year round, and I can't do that. So I bet some of this is quite sophisticated, right? And so what we're looking at is the sort of the thinking process. If you want to relate it to the Bible, because your channel seems to be very biblically oriented, this is the Israelites before the biblical text. They're doing this sort of thing.
The Canaanites. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the very earliest Israelites are semi-nomadic or nomadic.
Right.
They're going to have, they're going to think cosmologically because they're oral. and they're going to have, they're going to want to capture the power of the sun. If they grow crops, some of them, even though they're nomadic, some of them are semi-nomadic and growing things. They're going to have a whole solar calendar, whole solar ritual associated with it. This is probably how Yahweh gets incorporated into the cult. And so the same kinds of patterns are existing at the very earliest periods, not just with the Israelites, but in every period. I mean, so even though the Fremont are a late iteration of this, 300 to 1300 AD, what we find with them is what is a general pattern of what human beings do for tens of thousands of years, and it's sophisticated. They're paying very close attention to the sun, moon, and stars, and just like that cave. They sat in that cave. They stopped building campfires, and they said, "This is where we're going to look at the cosmos," and that's where they oriented themselves and created a sacred space from which to live their culture.
Wow. I love it, John. And next episode, we will probably be getting more into some interesting stuff. You're not done completing the PowerPoint presentation, but you go all over the place. So if you want to touch on that before we get off, and
you mean the flood presentation?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to go into detail.
I told Derek that I have a great presentation on the biblical flood story that he was probably expecting tonight, but I haven't finished the PowerPoint on it yet. No, some of this is new stuff. Look, my presentation is just on 7 different theories of the Great Flood over the past 2 centuries, right? The last 2 theories are really interesting. Okay. And one of them, people are probably, it has been out there since the 1960s, but most people are unfamiliar with it. And so it's really interesting. And then the very last theory, I'm pretty sure no one has heard about because I've developed it. And, I've published it in my book, Mythos and Cosmos. But, I track all the sources to how from the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, Near Eastern cultures started to use the flood story. And so that puts a whole new light on how the flood story is being used. So next time we'll do a presentation, we'll have a discussion on the biblical flood story. I can't do that in an hour.
No. That takes some time. I don't blame you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. John Knight Lundwall. He holds a doctorate in comparative myth and religion from Joseph Campbell's School of Comparative Myth, Pacifica Graduate Institute out of California. And he has written, it's down in the description, make sure you guys get it, Mythos and Cosmos, Mind and Meaning in the Oral Age. If you don't know, and you haven't seen the previous shows or anything like that, you're not aware of this, get the book if you really want to open up your thinking and really try to wrap your head around how, just an example, how a star on the sunrise on a specific day with an ancient family trying to survive, and all of a sudden this star that isn't there, and you watch the star like we watch TV, and all of a sudden green starts to show up on Earth, and they realize that star holds the power to life. And that was their way of connecting things. They didn't compartmentalize. So he goes into explaining the software in the mind of the ancient oral speaking people, whereas they weren't written. They didn't document things the way we do. And then, of course, the software changes, but the hardware remains the same, which fascinates me. So make sure you guys get the book, like this video, of course, share this information. If you have somebody who's fascinated and interesting on trying to understand our past, our history, and where mythology might even come from. And this is just fascinating, John. I really, really appreciate you joining me. Is there any other information you'd like to let our guests or our audience know?
No. Love you, brother.
Love you too, brother.
Have a good one.
You too. Thank you so much. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are Myth Vision.